I found the following record saved as an audio file on my roommate Mina's computer. From the tabs that were open on her browser, it seemed like she was trying to transcribe the recording to post it here. I didn't know her very well, but she was a lovely girl and she'll be missed. I finished part of the transcription, and I'm not sure what to make of it. Maybe you all will have better insight. If there's any interest, I'll be sure to finish the rest of the file. Cheers. KL. God, where do I start? I already submitted this information to the university 2 days ago. Now I might even be subject to disciplinary action. They think it's a hoax. Like I would jeopardize my dissertation, my entire future. No, okay. I'll begin at the beginning, like David freaking Copperfield. Right, the beginning. The following is a record of the University of Iceland investigation of the ice cave in Vatnajökull Glacier near Jökulsá Lagoon. Good, that sounds official. I'll edit all this before I write it down. My name is Mina Brown. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Iceland in Viking and medieval Norse studies. My specialty is runology, with an interest in comparing runic inscriptions in Iceland, Greenland, and Newfoundland. I intend to prove that Viking settlement expanded beyond Lansay, Ox Meadows, and moved south towards Maine. Maybe even, never mind, you don't need my CV. Jesus, if I still have a job tomorrow, if I'm still alive tomorrow. If you don't know, there's been non-stop earthquakes shaking the country for the past week. It's not severe here in Reykjavik, but you can feel a constant vibration beneath your feet, like the earth is trembling. We got word a few days ago that a group of tourists found something curious near Jökulsá, some kind of inscriptions in a cave beneath the ice. This struck me immediately as strange, because there aren't any known Viking settlements or archaeological sites in the Jökulsá area. The hypothesis was that the earthquakes must have shaken some ice or rocks loose, maybe exposed something that had been long buried. The tour group operator phoned the university who, though skeptical, couldn't afford to pass up a possible grant opportunity, which is how I found myself in the car with Professor Jonsson and Jacob Anderson, a research fellow from Norway, making the 5-hour trek to Jökulsá. Professor Jonsson, whose specialty is medieval Norse linguistics, was clearly unhappy at being tapped for the assignment. Really, we had all drawn the shit end of the stick. I remember him ranting not even 30 minutes outside of town, something about stupid tourists and children's graffiti, and it couldn't even be bothered to take pictures, and calling it Instagram, until Jacob had corrected him. I had to agree that the lack of pictures was strange. Every tourist in Iceland carries a camera. He must be right, I thought. Almost certainly some kind of prank. The hours rolled onward from the back seat, watching low mountains rise and fall in the distance. Iceland is so different from England, like an alien world. You can see the glaciers on the horizon peeking out from between the curves of rock, blue-gray with hearts of black. Something about the glaciers always filled me with dread. They're primeval somehow, old, a force outside of time. God, if only I knew then. I had been to Jökulsá before, but walking up the crest of the rock to the lagoon below felt, well, different this time. Jökulsá is a glacier lake, a giant pool of freezing water studded with Arctic blue ice. Enormous pieces even line the shore, some the size of your hand, others as large as boulders, giving these sands the tourist nickname Diamond Beach. When we arrived, though, it was late afternoon, and I remember thinking that the icebergs were floating slowly through the water like ghosts. I recall so clearly that there was a lone seal creating a wake where the lagoon met the ocean, all before a sudden tremor ripped through the ground, throwing me off balance. The final tours of the day had ended, and the food trucks parked to the side were packing up to leave. The tour guide who found the inscriptions, a man named Aaron, I don't remember his last name, but Aaron, wearing a red jacket, met us at the cafe on the far side of the lagoon. He explained that he had been taking the tourists around the lagoon by boat when he noticed a large cave opening where none existed before, tucked into the side of the glacier. He waved us onwards, assuring us that it was just a short walk. The cave opening was immediately significant in itself, a high arc. It was obvious from 10 meters away that it had been carved from the stone rather than created by natural forces. Even Professor Jonsson gasped, rushing closer to run his hands over the markings. The sides of the entryway were bordered by intricate crosshatches in the rock, lines with the interlocking circles typical of Norse art. It was so well preserved that the carvings could have been made yesterday, with very little signs of erosion. Aaron seemed pleased by our reaction, leaving to wait by the lagoon until we were finished with our preliminary inspection. It was Jacob who first pointed out the creatures and runic carvings above the cave opening. I stood on my tiptoes, trying to get a better look, until Professor Jonsson yelled for Aaron to bring over some boxes that held the life vests for the tour boat. We managed to stack them like a stair against the rock, getting about 2 meters off the ground. I thought from below that they were narwhal, maybe seal, but at eye level, the carvings were confusing. At first glance, they only passively resembled images that I was familiar with. I remember there was a long silence as we studied them, taking turns up and down the boxes. Professor Jonsson proposed that the middle carving was Yggdrasil, the world tree, with the 9 other carvings on either side representing the 9 worlds. I initially agreed with his hypothesis, but this carving looked like nothing I had ever seen before. For one, the branches seemed like they were drooping, withered, like the tree was dying. And the most obvious change was a carving of some enormous animal at its base, its appendages mending with the branches of the tree above. Jacob suggested it could be a giant squid. The carving had tentacles, true, and the face was like an octopus. But as I bent closer, I could see clawed feet gripping the roots of the tree, and long, narrow wings that stretched away from either side. It was a chimera, some horrible mixture of land and sea and air that made me deeply uncomfortable. And then the markings to the side. What Professor Jonsson said were the 9 worlds. I was just looking at them when the professor called me inside the cave. But they seemed like snakes, horned things, more terrible combinations of creatures that couldn't exist. I followed Professor Jonsson and Jacob into the cave itself, which opened quickly into an incredible blue amphitheater of ice. All around us were dozens of runestones, assembled in concentric circles from the back to the center of the room, ending in a spiral of polished white stones in the very middle. The professor was following the circles, moving from stone to stone excitedly. I think it's Nostrand, I remembered him saying, the darkest realm of the Norse underworld, I glanced at some of the carvings on the closest stones. There were skulls, what looked like flames, and then the tentacled thing again, rising as if from the center of a mountain. It didn't have any of the usual depictions of the underworld, these serpents and dragons typical of the mythology. I walked to the center of the room, to the spiral. Something about it made me shudder, drew me with a nauseous unease. I bent down, ran my hand over it. The stones were more ivory than white, notched on the edges. I know what, I reeled upwards, finding Jacob just behind me. "I think they're bone," I said. He nodded. I didn't add what else I'd suspected. Human bone. It seemed ridiculous to say at the time. Surely they were seal or sheep. Whale maybe, I told myself. Professor Jonsson was moving towards the back of the ice cave, gesturing towards 3 tunnels that led away from the main chamber. He wanted to explore them. "Professor," I said, "we've done what we set out to do. This can't be a hoax. If it is, it's one of the most elaborate Viking hoaxes ever created. Surely we've verified that there's a find worthy of further investigation." Professor Jonsson protested. He was enthusiastic, almost agitated, talking very quickly. He was insistent that we go down the tunnels. Even just one tunnel, he said finally, to quickly see if there was another chamber. I should have said no. We all should have said no. But Professor Jonsson was the head of our department, and though neither of us had worked closely with him before, our funding was based on his approval. Crap. We were cowards. I saw it too in Jacob's eyes when the professor left to ask Aaron outside for a robe. He was nervous, upset. "I'm not sure Professor Jonsson is correct about those carvings," he said, once we were out of earshot. "I've never seen anything like them, and my specialty is Norse picture stones." I agreed with him. The artwork and rune style seemed Norse, but the subject matter was completely foreign, not to mention disturbing. Professor Jonsson wasn't even an expert in art. He was a linguistics professor, for heck's sake. "No, okay, documentation purposes. Try to be more objective." "Fine, objective." That was when Professor Jonsson returned with a line that he had fixed to something outside the cave entrance, pulling the slack behind him. "Anyone want to pick a tunnel?" There was a long silence when we didn't reply. "All right, the tunnel on the left, it is," he said, disappearing into the darkness. He had the single torch and we walked down the tunnel for about 15 meters or so, before seeing a pale light shining ahead. At first, we thought it was daylight, but it became clear as we entered a second chamber that it came from the ceiling. Millions of microdots of aquamarine phosphorescence. There is a small pool in the center too, glowing the same ethereal green. I remember staring at the ceiling open-mouthed as Jacob and the professor argued about the origins of the biomaterial. "Glowworms," Professor Jonsson said. "I saw them in New Zealand." Something about the dots didn't seem exactly right to me. They weren't random as you would expect them to be, and I started to pick familiar shapes and patterns out of the clusters of light. "Constellations," I said. "I think they're constellations." Nobody heard me. Jacob insisted that glowworms don't exist in Iceland, bending down to get a better look at the pool of water. "It's probably plankton," he said, taking off his glove and sweeping his hand through the water. And that's when everything fell apart. Jacob screamed. His hand emerged, hissing from the pool, the skin half gone from the bone. He was holding the wrist with his good hand, screaming and screaming. God, it's like I can still hear it. Professor Jonsson was frozen. First aid, I remember yelling, bending down next to Jacob. Do we have first aid? Aaron must, in the boats for the tourists, he said, running back towards the tunnel entrance. And that was when we realized the tunnel entrance had disappeared. It can't be gone. I know, I said, still holding Jacob as best I could, trying not to look at his hand. It just can't be freaking gone. The rope was gone too, we realized, the severed end of it lying on the cave floor, cleanly sliced in half. A rockfall. Maybe there was another quake. Let's wait for Aaron then, I said. He knows we're here. He can dig us out. Jacob's screaming had quieted to a whimper, his hand still smoking in the dim light. I knew even then that there had been no earthquake and no rockfall. I know it sounds mad, but 1 minute the tunnel entrance was there, and the next it wasn't. Like we had slipped through the fingers of the cave to some upside-down world. And I knew with certainty even then that no one was coming to save us.